The morning started like any other day on the International Space Station. Captain Jack Thompson floated near the observation window, sipping his morning coffee from a sealed pouch. The Earth turned slowly below, a beautiful blue marble against the darkness of space. He had seen this view hundreds of times, but it never got old. The first sign that something was different came when the station's instruments started acting strange. At first, Jack thought it was just another equipment glitch. They had plenty of those up here. But then he saw it through the window, a shimmer in space, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but against the starry background. "Houston, are you seeing anything unusual on your end?" Jack called down to Mission Control. Before they could answer, the shimmer grew larger. The space in front of him seemed to bend and twist, and then suddenly, they appeared. The ships were like nothing he had ever seen. They looked like giant crystals, catching and reflecting sunlight in ways that made them seem to glow from within. They were massive, each one probably the size of a small city, and there were 5 of them, arranged in a perfect pentagon formation. "Houston, we have visual contact with multiple unknown objects. They appear to be artificial structures of some kind." Jack's voice remained steady, just like his training had taught him, even though his heart was racing. The next few hours were chaos. Every government, every military, every news organization on Earth was focused on the crystal ships. People were panicking in some cities, celebrating in others. And then the aliens made their first broadcast. They called themselves the Bright Ones, and they spoke perfect English, along with every other human language. Their holographic messages appeared on screens worldwide, showing beings that looked like living light given form. Their spokesperson, who called himself Ambassador Light, had a voice that sounded like wind chimes and expressed amusement at humanity's reaction. "We have been watching your civilization for some time," Ambassador Light announced to the United Nations during an emergency session. "Your species shows potential. Though your methods are crude and your technology primitive, we see possibilities for advancement under proper guidance." The ambassador's form flickered as he moved around the UN chamber, examining things with what seemed like amused interest. He picked up a delegate's smartphone, turning it over in his luminescent hands. "How quaint. You still use physical devices for communication. And look at this, silicon chips. We abandoned such basic materials thousands of years ago." Jack watched the broadcast from the space station, along with his crew. They had front-row seats to see more crystal ships arriving, positioning themselves in a complex orbital pattern around Earth. The ships moved with impossible grace, as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions to them. "Your species has an odd habit," Ambassador Light continued, his tone becoming almost patronizing. "You keep old technology, try to repair broken things, and even collect what you call vintage items. This attachment to obsolete tools is holding you back. In our civilization, we simply create new, perfect tools when needed. There is no waste, no clutter, no junk." The word junk came out like it left a bad taste in his mouth. The ambassador gestured, and a hologram appeared, showing images of Earth's orbiting satellites, old space stations, and various space debris. "Look at all this scattered metal and silicon, cluttering up your orbit. This is not the way of an advanced civilization." Several world leaders tried to explain humanity's practices of recycling, repurposing, and maintaining older technology, but the Bright Ones seemed unimpressed. They saw it as a sign of primitive thinking, an inability to simply create new and perfect solutions. Jack found himself getting angry as he watched. Sure, the station he commanded wasn't as sleek or advanced as those crystal ships, but it worked. It had been built through the cooperation of nations that once pointed nuclear weapons at each other. It was maintained by the ingenuity and dedication of human engineers who could make repairs with whatever they had on hand. There was beauty in that, wasn't there? The situation got worse when the Bright Ones began scanning Earth's technology. They seemed particularly interested in military installations, power plants, and communication centers. Their scans went right through any attempts to block them, and they shared their findings openly on global broadcasts. Your nuclear power plants are terribly inefficient. Your weapons systems are barely more advanced than throwing rocks. And your communications. Ambassador Light actually laughed, a sound like tinkling crystal. You still use radio waves and fiber optic cables. How do you manage to communicate at all with such primitive tools? The Bright One's mockery of human technology continued for days. They pointed out flaws in everything from our computers to our medical equipment. Nothing was advanced enough for them. Even humanity's most cutting-edge quantum computers were dismissed as cute first steps. But Jack noticed something interesting. While the aliens were busy pointing out everything wrong with human technology, they were also being careful not to share any of their own technological secrets. They showed off their capabilities but never explained how anything worked. It was like they were afraid of giving away too much information, even to such a primitive species. The situation reached a turning point when Ambassador Light made an announcement that sent chills through every government on Earth. After careful consideration, we have decided that your species requires guidance to develop properly. We offer you the opportunity to become a protectorate of our civilization. We will help you advance, under our direction, of course. The alternative. He let the threat hang in the air unspoken. From his vantage point on the space station, Jack watched more crystal ships arrive daily. Their formation was beginning to look less like a peaceful diplomatic mission and more like a military blockade. Earth's governments were in constant emergency sessions, trying to decide how to respond to what was essentially an ultimatum: accept alien rule or face the consequences. Looking down at Earth, Jack couldn't help but think about all the junk the aliens had mocked. The satellites that let people communicate across the globe. The old space stations and rockets that had taught humanity how to reach for the stars. The recycled materials that helped reduce waste and pollution. All the imperfect, sometimes patched-up technology that actually worked and helped real people every day. Maybe the Bright Ones were right. Maybe humanity was primitive compared to them. But as Jack watched another crystal ship take position around Earth, he couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens' attitude was a weakness. They were so convinced of their superiority, so dismissive of anything they considered beneath them, that they might be overlooking something important. He just hoped someone down there on Earth would figure out what that something was before it was too late. The United Nations building buzzed with tension as world leaders gathered for what might be humanity's most important meeting ever. The crystal ships of the Bright Ones filled the sky outside the windows, their surfaces catching the morning sun and throwing rainbow patterns across the assembly hall. Ambassador Light appeared in the center of the room without warning, his glowing form casting strange shadows. "Your time to consider our offer is running short," he announced, his wind-chime voice carrying an edge of impatience. "Will you accept our guidance and take your place as a protectorate of our empire?" The Secretary General stood up, her voice steady despite the pressure. "We have discussed your offer extensively, Ambassador. But before we give our answer, we request the right to demonstrate humanity's capabilities, to show you that we deserve to be treated as equals, not subordinates." The light being made a sound like breaking glass, his version of laughter. "And how do you propose to demonstrate these capabilities? By showing us more of your primitive recycling techniques, your repaired machines, your collections of technological refuse." At the back of the assembly hall, Commander Emma Wells of the United States Navy listened with growing anger. She had spent 15 years working with military communication systems, often keeping old equipment running long past its expected lifespan. Every insult from the alien ambassador felt personal. The Secretary General remained diplomatic. "We request 6 months to prepare a demonstration of human innovation and resourcefulness. After that, if you remain unimpressed, we will reconsider your offer of protectorate status." Ambassador Light's form flickered with what seemed like amusement. 6 months. Very well. We are curious to see what you might cobble together from your precious junk. Consider it granted. His tone made it clear he saw this as nothing more than entertainment. As soon as the ambassador disappeared, the real debate began. What kind of demonstration could possibly impress beings so technologically advanced? How could humanity prove its worth to a civilization that saw everything humans had built as primitive garbage? Commander Wells stood up, her heart pounding. She hadn't planned to speak, but words came out anyway. "They're overconfident," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet hall. "They're so convinced of their superiority that they're blind to the potential of what they call primitive." She walked to the center of the room, where Ambassador Light had been standing moments before. "I've spent my career working with all kinds of communication systems, from World War II radio equipment to modern quantum entanglement devices, and I've learned something important. Sometimes the old ways work when the new ones fail." The room stayed quiet, listening. Commander Wells continued, growing more confident. "The bright ones have shown us a lot about their technology, even while mocking ours. Their systems are incredibly advanced, yes, but they're also standardized. Perfect. They create new technology instead of fixing or adapting old systems. But what if that's not always the best approach?" She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared. Not as elegant as the aliens' version, but effective. It showed the growing field of space debris around Earth, along with the positions of old satellites and defunct space stations. "They see this as trash, but I see resources, tools, weapons, maybe if we're clever enough." The Chinese representative stood up. "What exactly are you suggesting, Commander?" "I'm suggesting we use everything they're mocking us for. Our ability to repair and repurpose, our primitive radio waves, our obsolete electronic systems. They've never needed to deal with old technology, which means they might not be prepared for it." The room erupted in discussion. Some thought it was crazy to try to fight the aliens with outdated technology. Others started to see the potential in the commander's words. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, they agreed. It was the best chance they had. The next few days were a blur of activity. Commander Wells was given authority to assemble a team and access to resources worldwide. She chose people who understood both old and new technology, people who could think creatively and work with whatever they had available. Dr. Marcus Reed, a computer engineer known for restoring vintage computers, was one of her first picks. He had once made a 1980s game console run modern encryption software. "Their systems are quantum-based," he explained during their first meeting. "They probably never bothered to protect against simple radio interference. Why would they? It's like building a missile defense system to stop paper airplanes." Lieutenant Tom Baker joined next, bringing his experience with military communications. He had once rebuilt a radio station in Afghanistan using parts from old Soviet equipment and a broken cell phone. "Every frequency we don't use anymore is a potential weapon," he said, spreading out charts of electromagnetic wavelengths. "They're so focused on their advanced communication methods, they might have forgotten about the basics." The team grew, adding specialists from around the world. They worked in secret locations, gathering old satellites, military equipment, and electronic waste. Every piece of junk the aliens had mocked became part of their arsenal. Some nights, Commander Wells would look up at the crystal ships through her office window and doubt their plan. The aliens' technology was so far beyond anything humanity had ever created. But then she would remember Ambassador Light's dismissive attitude, his complete confidence that nothing humans could do would matter, and her determination would return. The team had several close calls when the Bright One's scans passed over their facilities. But the aliens were so uninterested in humanity's primitive technology that they barely paid attention to what looked like piles of electronic waste and old equipment. One morning, about 2 months into their preparation, Dr. Reed came running into the command center, his eyes wild with excitement. "We found something," he shouted, waving a tablet. "Look at these readings from their ships." The data showed that the aliens' quantum communication systems experienced tiny fluctuations whenever they passed through areas of heavy radio traffic. The effect was small, but it was there. The Bright One's perfect technology had a weakness after all. It had never needed to account for primitive electromagnetic interference. "It's like they built the perfect house," Lieutenant Baker said, but never bothered with a basic fence because they thought nobody would dare throw rocks at their windows. Commander Wells smiled as she looked at the data. Maybe, just maybe, humanity's junk would prove more valuable than anyone had imagined. They had 4 months left to turn this discovery into something that could save Earth from becoming just another protectorate in the Bright One's empire. As she watched her team work, fitting old radio transmitters into defunct satellites and writing code that would run on everything from modern supercomputers to restored Apollo-era guidance systems, she felt a growing sense of hope. The aliens had given humanity 6 months to prove themselves worthy of respect. They probably expected some desperate attempt to copy their advanced technology. Instead, they were about to learn why humans kept all that primitive technology around. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, especially when your enemy never saw them coming. Deep in an old missile silo converted into a workshop, Dr. Marcus Reed wiped sweat from his forehead as he connected wires inside a satellite from the 1990s. Around him, dozens of engineers worked on similar projects, bringing dead machines back to life. The air smelled of solder and coffee, and the sounds of tinkering filled the massive underground space. "It's alive," he shouted as the satellite systems flickered to life, earning tired laughs from his teammates. They had been working 16-hour days for weeks now, but no one complained. Everyone knew what was at stake. Commander Wells walked through the facility, checking on different teams. She stopped at Lieutenant Baker's station, where he was testing different radio frequencies. Old ham radios, military communications equipment, and even restored World War I transmitters covered his workbench. "How's it coming along?" she asked, watching numbers scroll across his screen. Baker grinned and held up what looked like a classic walkie-talkie with extra parts attached to it. "We found out something interesting. When we broadcast on really old frequencies, especially if we use amplitude modulation, it creates weird echoes in their quantum systems. It's like trying to read a book while someone's flashing old TV static in your eyes." The discovery had led to their first major breakthrough. The team began collecting and restoring old radio equipment from around the world. Ham radio operators donated their gear. Museums provided vintage military equipment. Even old TV broadcasting stations were stripped for parts. But they needed more than just radio interference to make their plan work. In another part of the facility, a group led by Dr. Reed was working on something even more ambitious. They had gathered hundreds of old satellites, some still in orbit, others recovered from storage or salvage yards. The Bright Ones use quantum entanglement for their communications, Dr. Reed explained to Commander Wells, pointing to a complex diagram. "It's incredibly advanced, absolutely perfect for what it's designed to do. But that's the problem. It's too perfect. Their systems never learned to handle messy, imperfect signals." The team's plan was as simple as it was audacious. They would create a network of restored satellites, each broadcasting on different frequencies, using every primitive communication method humans had ever invented. Morse code, analog radio, early digital signals, everything the Bright Ones had dismissed as obsolete. One day, while testing their modified satellites, they made another important discovery. Bill, one of the younger engineers, was trying to fix a problem with an old weather satellite when he accidentally caused interference with the alien scans. "Did you see that?" he shouted, pointing at his monitor. The Bright One's scanning beam had flickered for a moment. It wasn't much, but it proved their theory. The aliens' advanced technology could be disrupted by the right combination of primitive signals. Commander Wells immediately ordered more tests. They found that different combinations of old technology could affect the alien systems in various ways. A mix of AM radio waves and early satellite transmission protocols could disrupt their scans. Cold War-era radar systems, when modified slightly, could create static in their quantum communications. The team worked around the clock, modifying their plan. They weren't just going to demonstrate humanity's worth. They were going to show the bright ones exactly why keeping old technology around could be an advantage. But they faced challenges too. Some of the equipment was so old that replacement parts didn't exist anymore. The team had to manufacture new components from scratch, often improving on the original designs. They also had to be careful not to draw too much attention from the aliens hovering above. Ambassador Light made occasional appearances at the UN, each time more condescending than the last. "We see you gathering your obsolete machines," he said during one visit. "How charming that you think they might impress us." His mockery only fueled the team's determination. 3 months into their preparation, they began testing their network. They launched several restored satellites under the guise of space debris cleanup missions. The bright ones barely paid attention. After all, what harm could human garbage collection do to their superior technology? Each launched satellite carried modified transmitters and custom-built interference generators. They looked old and harmless on the outside, exactly what the aliens expected to see. But inside, they contained the combined knowledge of decades of human communications technology, redesigned and repurposed for a new mission. The first full test of their system came when they activated 3 satellites simultaneously. The effect was small but noticeable. Several of the crystal ships briefly dimmed, their perfect surfaces showing tiny distortions. The aliens didn't seem to notice, but the team celebrated quietly in their underground facility. "It's like we're building an electromagnetic storm," Lieutenant Baker explained, watching the data from the test. "Each piece of old tech adds another layer of interference. Alone, they're harmless. Together, they create something the bright ones have never had to deal with." As they approached the final months of their deadline, the pace of work intensified. More satellites were launched, each one carefully positioned to look like part of routine space maintenance. Old ground-based transmitters were reactivated, disguised as museum pieces or communication history exhibits. Commander Wells spent long hours studying the bright ones' reaction to their activities. The aliens remained completely unconcerned, still convinced that humanity's reliance on old technology was a sign of weakness. Their overconfidence was becoming their greatest vulnerability. The team's final breakthrough came from an unexpected source. They discovered that the crystal ship's perfect quantum systems were most vulnerable to simple rhythmic interference patterns, like those produced by the earliest human broadcasting equipment. It was almost poetic. The most basic human technology might prove to be their strongest weapon against the aliens' advanced systems. As the 6-month deadline approached, Commander Wells gathered her team for one last briefing. The underground facility had become their second home, filled with the strange mix of old and new technology that represented humanity's best hope. "The bright ones think we're going to try to impress them with some pale imitation of their technology," she told her tired but determined team. "Instead, we're going to show them something they've never seen before: what happens when human ingenuity meets a lifetime of keeping old machines running." Looking around the room at the restored satellites, modified radio equipment, and countless other pieces of junk that the aliens had mocked, she felt a surge of pride. Maybe humanity wasn't as advanced as the bright ones, but they had something the aliens had never needed to develop: the ability to work with whatever tools were available, to adapt and repurpose rather than always creating something new. In just a few days, they would find out if their plan would work. The fate of Earth would depend not on humanity's most advanced technology, but on their ability to use everything they had ever created, no matter how old or simple it might seem. The day of the demonstration arrived with a clear, bright sky that seemed too peaceful for what was about to happen. Commander Wells stood at the main control center, surrounded by screens showing the positions of hundreds of restored satellites and activated ground stations around the world. Each piece of junk was in position, waiting for its moment. Ambassador Light appeared in the center of the UN Assembly Hall right on schedule, his glowing form radiating confidence and amusement. Behind him, through the windows, the crystal ships floated in perfect formation, their surfaces gleaming in the morning sun. "Your time has expired. the ambassador announced, his wind chime voice carrying a note of finality. "Show us what your primitive technology has accomplished. Then we will proceed with establishing our protectorate." Commander Wells stepped forward, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "We've prepared a demonstration of human innovation and resourcefulness. We ask that your ships maintain their current positions to observe the full effect." The light being made his characteristic sound of breaking glass. Laughter. "Our ships will stay exactly where they are. We wouldn't want to miss any part of your charming display of obsolete machinery." Wells nodded to Lieutenant Baker, who began the sequence they had practiced dozens of times. Around the world, old radio stations hummed to life. Restored satellites powered up their modified transmitters. Cold War-era radar installations began broadcasting on frequencies that hadn't been used in decades. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Ambassador Light started to say something dismissive, but then he paused. His glowing form flickered slightly. Behind him, the crystal ships trembled almost imperceptibly. "What is this interference?" he demanded, his usual musical voice taking on a harsh edge. "These primitive frequencies, they are causing unexpected resonance patterns." Commander Wells tried to hide her smile. "This is just the beginning. Lieutenant, Phase 2. Baker activated the second wave of their network. Dozens more satellites joined the broadcast, each one adding its own layer of primitive signals to the growing electromagnetic storm. The effect on the Bright One's technology was immediate and dramatic. The crystal ships began to pulse with irregular light patterns. Their perfect surfaces showed ripples like disturbed water. Ambassador Light's form became increasingly unstable, flickering and shifting as the old frequencies interfered with his quantum-based projection. "Stop this immediately," he commanded, but his voice crackled like a badly tuned radio. "Your obsolete technology cannot possibly affect our superior systems." "Actually," Dr. Reed spoke up from his station, "that's exactly why it's affecting your systems. You never needed to develop protection against these frequencies. You thought they were too primitive to matter." The ambassador's form stabilized for a moment as he tried to contact his ships, but the increasing storm of old radio waves, analog signals, and modified satellite transmissions made it almost impossible. Their quantum communication network, designed to be perfect and unbreakable, was drowning in a sea of primitive noise. Around the world, people watched in amazement as the formerly immaculate crystal ships began to drift out of formation. Their perfect coordination, based entirely on quantum systems, was breaking down under the assault of humanity's repurposed technology. One of the ships attempted to activate its defensive systems, but that only made things worse. The energy buildup in its crystals reacted with the chaotic mix of Earth's old frequencies, creating cascading disruptions throughout its systems. The massive vessel tilted to one side, its surface now rippling like liquid glass. Impossible. Ambassador Light's form was barely holding together now. "These are simply radio waves. Primitive electromagnetic transmissions. How can they be affecting our quantum-based technology?" Commander Wells stepped closer to the flickering ambassador. "Because we kept our old technology. We learned to repair it, modify it, combine it in new ways. While you were busy making everything perfect, we were learning how to work with imperfect tools." The chaos in orbit increased as more of their network activated. Ancient television frequencies mixed with military radio bands. Early satellite transmission protocols combined with modified radar signals. Each layer of primitive technology added to the overwhelming noise that was disrupting the aliens' perfect systems. A spectacular moment came when one of the crystal ships tried to engage its quantum drive. The attempt to create a precise quantum field in the middle of the electromagnetic storm resulted in a brilliant display of light and energy. The ship's perfect crystalline surface briefly turned into a spectacular light show before its systems shut down completely. Ambassador Light made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. "You don't understand what you're doing. Our technology is millions of years ahead of yours. This cannot be happening." "That's exactly why it's happening," Lieutenant Baker called out from his station. "Your technology is too advanced to handle something this simple. It's like a person who only speaks perfect classical Latin trying to understand street slang." The ambassador's form began to break apart as the interference reached its peak. Before he disappeared completely, he saw something that must have been horrifying to his perfect advanced civilization. Humans using jury-rigged old radio equipment to bring down the most sophisticated technology in the galaxy. As the crystal ships drifted helplessly in orbit, their quantum systems overwhelmed by the storm of primitive signals, Commander Wells grabbed a simple handheld radio, one that looked like it had been pulled from a museum. She pressed the talk button and spoke clearly. "This demonstration can continue for as long as necessary. We can also increase the intensity if you'd like to see what else our junk can do to your perfect ships. Or we can discuss treating humanity as equals rather than primitive beings in need of guidance." For several long moments, there was no response. The crystal ships continued to drift, their surfaces flickering like broken television screens. Then, finally, a voice came through the radio. Not through their quantum communications, but through simple radio waves. It was Ambassador Light, forced to use what he had considered primitive technology to communicate. We will discuss terms," he said, his musical voice distorted by radio static. "Perhaps we have something to learn from your species after all." Around the world, cheers erupted as people realized what had happened. Humanity had defended itself not with advanced weapons or copied alien technology, but with the very tools the Bright Ones had mocked. Every piece of junk they had laughed at had become part of the network that brought down their perfect ships. In the control center, Commander Wells looked at her team. The engineers who had restored old satellites, the technicians who had rebuilt ancient radio equipment, the programmers who had written code to run on decades-old systems. They had proved that sometimes the old ways were the best ways, especially when your enemy never saw them coming. The crystal ships hung in orbit, their surfaces still rippling with interference patterns, serving as a shining reminder that perfection could be defeated by innovation, and that even the most advanced civilization could be brought down by underestimating simple, reliable technology. 1 week after the demonstration, the crystal ships still hung in Earth's orbit, their surfaces now stable but dulled compared to their former brilliance. They had managed to restore basic functions, but only by shutting down their most advanced systems, the very systems vulnerable to humanity's primitive technology. The United Nations Assembly Hall was packed as Commander Wells and her team prepared to meet with Ambassador Light. This time, the ambassador appeared using a simple holographic projector, Earth technology, rather than his quantum-based manifestation. His glowing form looked less impressive now, flickering occasionally as the projector struggled to maintain his image. "My civilization has been reconsidering our approach," Ambassador Light began, his tone lacking its former confidence. "We have never encountered a species that could affect our technology in this manner." Commander Wells nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the victory they had achieved. "We're glad you've reconsidered. We've always preferred friendship over conflict." The ambassador's form shimmered. "Before we discuss new terms for our relationship, I must understand how you accomplished this. Our scientists cannot comprehend how your outdated equipment could possibly interfere with quantum systems." Dr. Reed stepped forward, carrying an old ham radio that had been modified with parts from several different decades of human technology. "The answer is simple, Ambassador. You designed perfect systems for a perfect environment. But the universe isn't perfect, it's messy." He held up the radio. "This transmitter was built in 1965. We modified it with parts from the 1980s, 1990s, and today. Each generation of human technology had to account for interference from everything that came before. Your systems never had to do that." Lieutenant Baker joined in, pointing to a display showing the spectrum of signals they had used. "When we combined all these primitive frequencies, they created patterns your quantum systems couldn't filter out. It's like trying to listen to one perfect note while someone plays 1,000 different instruments off-key." The ambassador's form flickered again as he processed this information. But surely you understand that our technology is still far superior to yours. This was merely an unexpected vulnerability. Commander Wells smiled slightly. A vulnerability you never considered because you dismissed our old technology as worthless junk. That's the point, Ambassador. We keep our old tools because we've learned that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. The negotiations continued for hours, with the Bright Ones gradually accepting that they would need to treat humanity as equals rather than primitives in need of guidance. But Commander Wells and her team knew there was more work to be done. The aliens' homeworld might decide to send more ships, better prepared for Earth's primitive defenses. That night, as the team gathered in their command center, Lieutenant Baker brought up the concern everyone had been thinking about. They'll adapt. Next time, their ships will be shielded against our frequencies. Commander Wells nodded, looking at the data streams from their worldwide network of repurposed technology. Which is why we need to take this to the next level. Dr. Reed, tell them about your idea. The engineer grinned and pulled up a complex diagram on the main screen. We've analyzed the quantum signatures from their ships. Their entire civilization is built on the same technological principles. Perfect, elegant, and completely unprepared for messy old radio waves. He zoomed in on what looked like a map of star systems. Their homeworld defense grid uses the same quantum communication network. If we can boost our signal enough to reach their system, we could disable their entire defense network, Commander Wells finished. Not as an attack, but as leverage to ensure they never threaten Earth again. The plan was audacious. They would need to dramatically increase the power and range of their network, building massive transmitters and launching dozens more modified satellites. But they had something now that they didn't have before: the cooperation of governments worldwide, and proof that their concept worked. Over the next month, while negotiations with the Bright Ones continued, humans around the world worked to enhance their network. Old radio towers were recommissioned. Giant satellite dishes from the early space age were restored and upgraded. Museums donated vintage equipment that engineers modified with modern components. Ambassador Light and his fellow representatives remained unaware of these preparations. They were focused on repairing their damaged ships and renegotiating their relationship with Earth. They still couldn't quite believe that their perfect technology had been defeated by what they considered technological relics. The final piece of the plan came together when Captain Jack Thompson, still commanding the International Space Station, helped position a modified communications array that would serve as the central amplifier for their signal. From his vantage point in orbit, he could see both the still struggling crystal ships and the growing network of human technology spreading across Earth's surface and orbit. "It's ready," he reported to Commander Wells. "We can now project our signal all the way to their homeworld. It won't be as strong as what we hit their ships with, but it should be enough to demonstrate our capabilities." Commander Wells brought the plan to world leaders, who approved a final attempt to secure Earth's safety. They would send a message to the Bright One's homeworld, along with a demonstration of what Earth's primitive technology could do to their defenses. The day arrived with tension filling the air. Ambassador Light and the other representatives were invited to observe what humans called a good faith demonstration of our capabilities. They still didn't understand what was about to happen. Commander Wells gave the order, and around the world, the network activated. Old transmitters hummed to life, modified satellites aligned their antennas, and Captain Thompson activated the space station's amplifier array. Together, they created a concentrated beam of primitive radio waves, aimed directly at the Bright One's distant home system. The signal took hours to reach its destination, traveling across light years of space. When it finally arrived, the effects were even more dramatic than they had hoped. Reports came flooding in from the crystal ships as their communication with home suddenly filled with chaos and confusion. On the main screen, they watched as the aliens' home defense grid, visible through their own communication channels, began to flicker and fail. One by one, their perfect quantum defense systems were overwhelmed by the storm of primitive radio waves from Earth. Ambassador Light's holographic form seemed to collapse in on itself for a moment. When he stabilized, his glowing appearance had dimmed considerably. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Wells stepped forward. "We've demonstrated that Earth cannot be conquered or controlled. Your homeworld's defenses are experiencing exactly what your ships did in our orbit, but on a much larger scale." She pointed to the display showing the continuing disruption of the aliens' defense grid. "We can maintain this interference indefinitely. We can also end it immediately, once we have a treaty guaranteeing Earth's independence and establishing mutually beneficial relations." The ambassador looked at the display, then at the human team who had accomplished something his civilization had thought impossible. "You used the technology we mocked to defeat our most advanced systems with your junk." Dr. Reed nodded. "That's why we keep our junk around, Ambassador. Everything has potential if you look at it the right way." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything humanity had experienced before. For the first time, the Bright Ones approached humans as equals, perhaps even with a touch of respect. The final treaty not only guaranteed Earth's independence, but established trade and knowledge exchange that would benefit both civilizations. As the crystal ships prepared to depart several weeks later, Commander Wells stood at the observation window of the control center, watching their now repaired hulls glinting in the sunlight. Captain Thompson's voice came through on the communication system from the space station above. "They're powering up to leave," he reported. "And you should see this. They've modified their quantum drives with what looks like protective shielding against radio frequencies. Seems they've learned something from us after all." Commander Wells smiled as she watched the ships depart. Humanity had done the impossible. They had taken what the Bright Ones considered worthless junk and used it to protect their planet. In doing so, they had taught an advanced civilization an important lesson about innovation, adaptation, and the value of keeping old tools around. As the last crystal ship disappeared into the darkness of space, she looked at the network displays showing hundreds of reactivated satellites and repurposed radio stations around the world. What had started as a desperate defensive measure had become humanity's greatest strength, a testament to their ability to find value in what others dismissed as obsolete. Earth's junk had conquered an advanced alien homeworld, and in doing so, had earned humanity its place among the stars.